What's up, everyone? It's Jasmine. On today's episode of the Slain Project, we're going to be talking about the Highway of Tears. A vast majority of these murders and disappearances are unsolved, and a lot of the victims are Native women. I would also like to suggest this book, The Highway of Tears by Jessica McDarman. It's a really good book, and there's a lot of information in there that is not on the internet. I will also be doing a follow-up video about the girls that did not make the official E-Pana list and for the girls in the surrounding wilderness. Because if a killer is out there hunting humans, who's to say that he's going to stick on the main highway? So in this video, I'm going to start off by going over a little history about the highway and the reasons why these killings are happening. And if you do not want to listen to the history, you could skip to about the 11-minute mark to get straight into the victims. So make sure that you subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell so that you don't miss the follow-up episodes. And also do the same if you want to see more videos on missing and murdered Indigenous people. And if you're interested, I'm going to link some tarot card readings down below if that is something that you are interested in. Now let's get right into it. The main stretch of the Highway of Tears runs 725 kilometers or 450 miles on Highway 16 between Prince Rupert and Prince George in northern British Columbia. For over 5 decades, girls and young women have disappeared or have been found murdered beside the highway. Most of the victims were Indigenous women. The Indigenous population is commonly referred to as First Nations. There are 32 Indigenous communities along Highway 16. In the earlier decades, these killings were known as the highway killings. In 1998, a woman named Florence Naziel was speaking of families crying over their loved ones missing from along the highway and referred to it as the Highway of Tears. The First Nations families of the missing and murdered women along the highway have fought for decades to get any type of recognition from the Canadian government to acknowledge the crisis along the highway. In 1981, RCMP from various detachments sat down together to talk about these murders. Nothing was really done at the time, but they knew the killings were enough of a problem to try to compare notes about them. Many of the MMIW come from very isolated communities along the highway. They often have to hitchhike to live everyday life. And the Highway of Tears is surrounded by vast wilderness and empty spaces. When a body is dumped, the surrounding bush will completely swallow and consume a human body very quickly. Add in wildlife activity, and it's a miracle that any bodies have ever been found. Their dump sites only known to the killer or killers. Contributing factors in the disappearances and murders are living in isolation, poverty, drug and alcohol dependency, homelessness, lack of public transportation, and survival sex. But don't be fooled, folks. This was all by design. Before contact with settlers, the native populations in Canada and the US were very content with what they had. They lived off the land and lived in adequate shelters that kept them surviving for thousands of years. As the new occupants of North America laid anchor and expanded west, the native population was forced onto isolated reservations and reserves. Their traditional way of living was also taken away, and they were introduced to alcohol, forcing a dependency on the new governing bodies. Forced English education at residential schools brought on more harm and suffering. The education was mediocre, abuse at all levels was endured, and they were trained in low-grade trades. The plan never included quality education or skilled trade training. The goal was to teach them English and strip away their cultural identity to integrate them into mainstream society at a lower level than the colonizers. My point is that these living conditions were forced upon the Indigenous populations, and they continually receive blame for their lifestyles when they turn up missing or murdered. RCMP most of the time then would say that they were runaways or just out drinking. In 2014, then Prime Minister of Canada, Stephen Harper, said during an interview that the MMIW of Canada is not a high priority on the country's radar. In 2005, Project E-Pana was formed by the Canadian government to look into all the violence against women and girls along the highway. Their scope originally included only Highway 16, but later encompassed parts of Highways 97, 5, and 24, and expanded from Prince George to Hinton, Alberta. I could not find a reason why the area was extended, but my best guess is that they are main arteries to Highway 16, or simply just a nod to when they were referred to as the highway killings. To be listed on the E-Pana list, the victim has to meet certain qualifications. They are: number 1, the victim has to be female. Number 2, high-risk behavior such as hitchhiking or prostitution. Number 3, missing from or found within 1 mile of sections of highways 16, 97, 5, or 24. Number 4, evidence of a stranger attack. The list of females the E-Pana list investigated began with 3, then 7, and after the expanded scope included 18. Wayne Clary was staff sergeant of the E-Pana investigation before he retired. He told journalist Connie Walker on the Who Killed Alberta Williams podcast that 57 women were originally considered as Highway 16 victims. Only settling on 18 victims, 8 of which did not occur on Highway 16, seems like a very low number. It seems as if the number of victims is being downplayed, perhaps not to cause a public panic, or simply because most of the victims are First Nations. Expanding the boundaries for E-Pana consideration allowed for more non-Native women to be listed as Highway of Tears victims. The Canadian government estimates 1,200 MMIW, but the First Nations people estimate at least 4,000 across Canada. Some estimates go up to 12,000. The harsh reality is that these totals have never been kept track of. Racism against Indigenous people in Canada is very rampant. They are often seen as third-class citizens. This has caused many Indigenous people to form a sense of mistrust of the RCMP. The same sense of urgency should apply to all missing persons, whether they are Caucasian or not. Besides the RCMP meeting in 1981, there also was a similar meeting in 1995, a symposium that included the victims' families in 2006, and the launch of the National Inquiry in 2016. A lot of families testified about the victims in their families. Some families chose not to participate in the public hearings because they do not think things will ever change. They might be right. Racism is still a problem in Canada and the rest of the world. Change will be very difficult without breaking through this barrier. One of the recommendations from the meetings was for improved cell phone service along the highway. First suggested in 2006, it would not be until 2021 that cell service was improved from Prince Rupert to Smithers. This took 15 years to deploy. Another recommendation was for public transportation. This was eventually put into place by using shuttle buses. They only run on certain schedules at peak times, so if you have to do something after hours, you will be stuck without a ride. Despite this effort, people still have to rely on hitchhiking. As a result of this, Greyhound suspended most of its service areas along the highway. Before I get started on the Highway of Tears victims, I just want to add that Australia is dealing with the same issues about MMIW. Native Aboriginals of Australia also were colonized by Britain. They also dealt with treaties, residential schooling, and racism. Their history is parallel to the Indigenous peoples of the U.S. and Canada. First Nations Senator Dorinda Cox helped propel a national inquiry into MMIW of Australia in 2021. She often compares Australia's plight to Canada's experience in the matter. Unlike Canada's expensive $92 million inquiry, which was led by a commission over 3 years, the Australian inquiry will be led by its senators. The Australian inquiry is only expected to last 6 months and will hopefully have a final report by June 2022. Now let's get into the victims of the Highway of Tears. It is believed that the murders began around 1969. It is a common time frame in which other serial killings began. I do believe that the common widespread use of personal vehicles helped ignite such highway murder sprees. Australia also had a string of highway killings in the 1970s, also fueled by isolation and hitchhiking. Gloria Moody. Gloria was a 26-year-old mother to a son and daughter, and they were from Bella Coola on the Nuksulk First Nation. In October 1969, her father convinced her to join him and some other family members to go Christmas shopping in Williams Lake, which was 200 miles away from their home. On Saturday, October 25, 1969, after spending the day in Williams Lake, Gloria and her brother went to some local bars to unwind. Williams Lake was busy that weekend. It was payday for most, all the hotels were booked, and there was a large 4-H sale happening. When it was time to leave, they began to walk back to the hotel room. When almost to the room, her brother turned around and Gloria was not following him. He never seen her alive again. The next day, at about 11 a.m., her body was found about 6 miles west. She was nude. Her clothing was scattered about the murder scene. She was also beaten severely in her face and was beaten so badly on her body that she bled out because of a ruptured artery. It was determined she was raped. In an article dated December 22, 1998, Constable John Pitzek stated that he believes that 3 men were responsible for the attack on Gloria and that they are all now dead. 2 committed suicide and the other drank himself to death. It is believed she is the first Highway of Tears victim. Police speculated that the early highway victims were killed on or near full moons because Gloria died on a full moon. Gloria's dad died in 1972, and he always felt guilty for taking her shopping that weekend. Micheline Perry. Micheline was an 18-year-old student at Montreal College in Quebec in 1970. She lived with her parents, and they stated that she talked about going west, but never said she was actually going. It was determined that she left home on June 18, 1970. Her dad received a hospital bill for $3 from Edmonton General Hospital in early July. Micheline was last seen by 2 women who picked her up hitchhiking. They dropped her off at the gates of Tompkins Ranch, which was located between Fort St. John and Hudson's Hope along Highway 29. This was on July 8, 1970. A family was berry picking and stumbled upon her remains on August 8, 1970. She was found about 100 feet off of the highway and about 13 miles away from the ranch. Her body was disturbed by animals. Luckily, her photo ID was found on her person. There have been no suspects or persons of interest publicly identified. Micheline's killer is still at large. Gail Ways. Gail was 19 years old and worked at a service station in Clearwater, BC, when she went missing on October 19, 1973. She got off work between 9 and 9:30 p.m. that day, changed her clothes, and told her co-worker she was going to hitchhike to Kamloops to spend the weekend with her parents. The distance was 123 kilometers. Her whereabouts were unknown until her body was found on April 6, 1974. She was found in a water-filled ditch off Highway 5 about 7 miles south of Clearwater. A young girl was riding her horse when she found Gail. Half of her body was frozen in the waterlogged ditch. She was nude and only wearing her socks. Her shoes and panties were nearby. Her other clothes and purse have never been found. Bobby Jack Fowler is a suspect in her death. Pamela Darlington. Pamela was 19 and living in North Kamloops with her roommates. At about 9:30 p.m. on November 6, 1973, she told them she was going to hitchhike downtown to meet some of her friends at the bar. Her friends say that she made it to the bar that night, but investigators question if they were mistaken on the day because Pamela frequented the bars often. Her body was found the next day at Pioneer Park about 4 blocks from the bar and near the boat launch ramp on the Thompson River. She was nude and lying face down in the river. Autopsy shows that she drowned, but only after her face was smashed in by some rocks. She also had bite marks on her body. There were bloody rocks nearby, and she was lying on top of her bloody leather jacket. A train crew might have seen her killer during the early morning hours of November 7th between the hours of 4 and 5 a.m. The train was only 8 cars long and was traveling between Pioneer Park and the city center. A white or salmon-colored car was driving from the park and tried to beat the train to the rail crossing. They were late, and rather than waiting for the short train, they tried to beat it to the second stop. The car was late again and blocked by the train, so they tried a third crossing. This road to the track was closed for some time, so when the driver realized this, they stopped and turned off their headlights at the dead end. Bobby Jack Fowler is suspected in her death. Colleen McMillan. Colleen was a 16-year-old girl living in Lac La Hatch. On August 9, 1974, she left her home at about 8:30 p.m. to hitchhike to her friend's house. She was last seen standing in front of a row of mailboxes at Highway 97 and Emerald Crescent at about 8:40 p.m. Her plan was to hitchhike to Timothy Lake Road, about 5 kilometers away. Her mom reported her missing on August 11th. On August 25th, a motorist stopped at a rest area at 102 Mile. They were 20 yards from the roadway when they discovered Colleen's clothing. Her case was then treated as a homicide. Tracking dogs, helicopters, and heavy equipment was used to help search for Colleen. On September 4th, 1974, a man was hiking in the bush near a logging road in the area of Davis Lake Road and 86 Mile. He found Colleen's body. She was too decomposed to determine her cause of death. The spot she was found was 30 miles away from the row of mailboxes she caught a ride from. Her mom stated that Colleen did not hitchhike often, and when she did, she would wait for someone she knew. The man who killed Colleen was a very violent man. He appeared very charming and likable on the outside, but quickly turned into a violent killer. She could have been easily fooled by him. Suspect DNA was taken from Colleen's body. The first attempt was unsuccessful. A second attempt was a success, but yielded no results from Canada's database. The decision was made in 2012 to upload the DNA profile into Interpol. This led to a match. The man's name was Bobby Jack Fowler. Bobby would not face charges for Colleen's murder because he died of cancer while in prison in 2006. He was serving time for kidnapping and assaulting a woman in Oregon. He was also suspected of many other deaths of young women in Oregon. His type seemed to be young Caucasian women with dark hair. He worked in Prince George in 1974 as a roofer. If you knew Bobby Jack at any time before his death, please contact the E-Pana tip line at 1-877-543-4822. Establishing a timeline for him can be crucial in solving other missing and murdered cases. Monica Ignace. Monica lived in Thornhill with her family. On the day of Friday, December 13th, 1974, she went to school as usual at about 7 a.m. Monica was 14 years old and in the 10th grade. After school that day, she went to Terrace, which is about 8 miles from Thornhill. She went to a pizza parlor and to a billiard room with her friends. While she was there, it began to snow and about 5 inches fell that night. When it was time to go home, she tried to find a ride home near the Terrace Hotel. When she was not able to get a ride, she started walking towards her home down Highway 16. She never arrived at her home and nobody ever seen her alive again. Her parents would report her missing and they tried to search for her. The winter snow made such searches difficult. Her body would eventually be found on April 8, 1975, by police who were using search dogs. She was located about 100 meters off of a logging road called Selgar. She was nude and reports say she died of strangulation. In 1990, RCMP said that 3 witnesses came forward and said they had seen Monica getting into a car. A woman was put under hypnosis and described the suspect, vehicle, and was able to give a partial plate number, but she could not say where the license plate was from. Vehicle records in 1974 were not computerized at the time, so any searches for the partial plate number had to be done by hand in paper files. As of this recording, the killer of Monica Ignace has never been identified. Monica Jack. Monica was 12 years old when she disappeared on May 6, 1978. That day, she helped her mom make a birthday cake for her little sister, who just turned 11. Monica's birthday was also in a few days, and her dad gave her some money for some new shoes. Monica and her 14-year-old cousin Debbie decided to ride their bikes to Merritt to go shopping. Monica was to get her shoes and a birthday gift for her sister. Monica rode 2 kilometers from her home in Nicola Lake to meet her cousin at her house in Nicola. From there, the pair rode into Merritt, 10 kilometers away on Highway 5A. When they were done shopping, they rode their bikes home and the pair split up near Debbie's house. Monica was almost home when her mom seen her riding along the highway and asked if she wanted a ride home. Monica wanted to ride the rest of the way home, and her mom let her do so. Her mom and other adults in the family were going to Stony Lake to catch buckets of trout during the night. It was a family tradition. The older children were to look after the younger ones back at home. Monica's mother did not know she did not make it home until the next morning. The police were notified immediately and they began to search Nicola Lake with boats. Monica's bike was found by her family. It was thrown down an embankment. Some witnesses came forward and said they heard shouting near where the bike was found. They could not see who was arguing, but they just assumed it was a couple fighting. Another witness said that they seen a man standing on the side of the road near a light green truck with a camper. Monica's family endured the pain of not finding her body for 17 years. In June 1995, her body was found in a ravine on Swacum Mountain, about 20 miles from where her bike was found. Her skeleton was positively identified in February 1996 by DNA and dentals. A man by the name of Gary Hanlon confessed to murdering Monica and another 11-year-old girl named Mary Herbert, who was from Abbotsford, BC in 1975. He confessed during a Mr. Big operation to a man who he believed was a crime boss, but who was really an undercover cop. Gary said he kidnapped Monica and threw her in the bathroom of his camper before he drove up the hill. He then raped and strangled her before dumping her body. He was sentenced to life in prison in January 2019. He was 71 years old. The charges he had for murdering Mary Herbert were dropped when he was sentenced. The charge was deemed inadmissible because Gary stated that he learned info about her murder from the media. Maureen Mosey. Maureen was a 33-year-old woman from Edson, Alberta. She left Edson on May 4th, 1981, with a friend to start a vacation. The final destination was Vancouver. She had called her mom a couple days after leaving home and said she was having a nice time. Maureen and her friend parted ways in Enderby. On May 8, 1981, two witnesses seen her hitchhiking near Salmon Arm. They said a white male picked her up. He was described as middle-aged, unshaven, and had collar-length hair. He was driving an old beat-up car that was either blue or green. The car was loud because the tailpipe was hanging. It was missing a front hubcap, had damage to the rear panel, and the front plate from Alberta was hanging on by one screw. A partial plate number was also given by the witness, who was placed under hypnosis. And again, records were not digital back then, so everything had to be reviewed by hand. The same witness, while under hypnosis, was able to work with an artist and able to capture the moment Maureen accepted the ride from the man. The picture also accurately depicts what Maureen was wearing. She had on a moose hide vest, moccasins, a blouse, blue jeans, and she was also wearing a trench coat and carrying a purse. The next day after she was last seen, on May 9, 1981, her body was found about 10 miles east of Kamloops near the junction of Highway 97 and Trans-Canada Highway 1. A woman walking her dog found her body. Her face was beaten and the back of her head was crushed. There was no evidence of a sexual assault. 3 witnesses remember seeing her at the murder scene with the same man who picked her up. The same artist who drew the first picture also made a picture at the crime scene. The car can be seen parked and Maureen and the suspect are standing outside of the car talking. If you remember a man from Alberta who drove an old beat-up car like this in the early 1980s, please contact investigators with E-Pana. Shelley Ann Bascu. Shelley is the only official Highway of Tears victims on the list from Alberta. She was 16 years old when she went missing and lived in Hinton, which connects directly to Highway 16. She was very petite. Shelley was only 4 feet 11 inches tall and weighed between 80 and 90 pounds. On May 3, 1983, Shelley went to her boyfriend's house after school. He lived in the Sunset Trailer Courts, which was about 4 miles from her house. At about 8 p.m., she called her mom and said she was on her way home. Shelley stated that a friend was going to give her a ride home and asked her mom to cook her favorite noodle dish for her. She said she would be home in about 15 minutes. Her boyfriend called Shelley's house at about 9 p.m. wanting to speak to her. Shelley's mom thought he was pulling a prank because Shelley was not home and thought she was still with him. The boyfriend said that their friend was not able to give her a ride home and she started walking home down Highway 16. They both realized that something was terribly wrong. Shelley's family began searching immediately after they called the police. Her dad and brother drove around looking for her. Her mom started walking down the dark highway screaming out for her. It was very windy that night, and the wind gave out a haunting howl. A witness would soon come forward after media reports and said they had seen Shelley walking with her school books in the direction of her home. They also stated that she showed no interest in hitchhiking. A few days later, some of her belongings were found near the Athabasca River near Highway 40. The things found were her jacket, bra, pantyhose, student union card, and a library book she just checked out. I did see conflicting reports on whether suspect DNA was found. One source said there was DNA found and it belonged to an unknown person, and I also seen reports where they said no DNA was found. I am unsure which account is true. Besides the clothing that was found, Shelley was last seen wearing a burgundy sweater, gray sneakers, blue jeans with a stripe down the leg, and an emerald ring and opal earrings. Her remains have never been found. Alberta Williams. Alberta was 24 years old in 1989 and lived with her sister Claudia in Vancouver, BC. That summer, the sisters went up to Prince Rupert to take seasonal jobs in a fish cannery. It was a very common summer job to take, and a lot of First Nations people would move to Prince Rupert in the summer to do this. The hours were long, up to 15 hours a day, but the paychecks were worth it. At the end of the season, on August 26, 1989, all the workers met up at a local bar to celebrate before most of them went back home. The bar is referred to as Popeyes or Bogies. They were in the same building. One bar was upstairs and one was downstairs. According to Claudia, Alberta was having a great time with her friends. At closing time, everybody was standing out in front of the bar. Alberta asked Claudia to come with her to a party. Claudia got distracted by her boyfriend. When she turned back around, Alberta and everyone was gone. Alberta was reported missing and her family began to search for her. Witnesses said that they seen her get into a truck with her Uncle Jack and his friend. The party was supposedly at Jack's house, but he denied this and said that he did not leave the bar with her. On September 16, 1989, a family was out hiking near the Tyee overpass along Highway 16 when they found Alberta's remains. She was nude, raped, and strangled. Jack was her uncle by marriage. On the podcast Missing and Murdered, Who Killed Alberta Williams? Some people say they saw Alberta crying at the bar and that Jack was acting like a controlling boyfriend towards her. He was confronted on the podcast by the host Connie Walker and her producer Marnie. He declined to comment and referred them to his lawyer. The podcast came about because the former lead detective on Alberta's case, named Gary Kerr, emailed Connie Walker to say he knows who killed her. He just does not have the evidence to back it up. The person he named was Jack. Gary met Alberta's sister Claudia in Smithers, BC, when she testified during the national inquiry. He was there as her support person. Claudia and other people question why Alberta is listed as a Highway of Tears victim. It is believed she was murdered by someone she knew and she was not hitchhiking. A strange note on some news clippings I have seen, 2 different articles posted on the same day in the same paper say that foul play was not suspected, and the others say that it is. Not sure if it was just a misprint, but I thought it was odd. The person who did this to Alberta is still out there. Delphine Nicol. Delphine was 15 and lived in Telkwa with her mom. Her mother, Judy, was very sick at the time she disappeared and was in the hospital for about 4 months. Her mom said that Delphine was the only one of her kids that visited her regularly. While Judy was in the hospital, Delphine's uncle kept an eye out on her because he lived next door to her. On June 13, 1990, at about 2 p.m., Delphine went to Smithers to meet up with some of her friends and they hung out for the day. As the night wound down, the friends were at the Mohawk gas station on the corner of Main Street and Highway 16. Delphine told her friends that her mom was not home and wanted to know if they wanted to stay the night. The friends could not, so they parted ways. Delphine usually did not ever invite people to sleep over at her house. Her friends wondered why she asked that night, the night she disappeared. At about 10:30 p.m., she called her uncle to say she was on her way home and walked to the highway to stick her thumb out for a ride. A person who worked at the gas station reported seeing her getting into a red sports car. Her mom said that they did know someone who had a red sports car. However, she cannot name them publicly due to the ongoing investigation. In April 1993, the Missing Children Society of Canada sent a private investigator named Fred Maley to Smithers in hopes of turning up new leads. He was very thorough in his work and even went to Vancouver's downtown east side to search for her. A common police theory is that she ran away there. No trace of her was ever found. Her mom was desperate for answers and sought out help from two psychics. One of them said she was near a river. The Buckley River area was searched with cadaver dogs. A postal worker also said they had found a bloody shoe, and that area was also searched. Again, no sign of Delphine turned up. The uncle has since died, but investigators questioned him hard before his death. He has not been ruled out indefinitely, but it seems not likely he was involved. Investigators believe Delphine never made it home. Apparently, there was some bloody clothes found near Driftwood that some people called police to collect. There is not record of this evidence or contents of it found. There was a rumor that Delphine went to a party in Driftwood with some older men. This also did not lead anywhere. Delphine hitchhiked often, and her photo appears on a billboard warning about the dangers of hitchhiking. She was last seen wearing a bleached tie-dye t-shirt and was carrying a Western-style shoulder bag with fringes. She is still missing, and her remains seem to have been swallowed up by the forest. Ramona Wilson. Ramona was 16 years old and lived with her mother, Matilda, in Smithers. She was the youngest child of her family and was their shining light. Matilda was told she could never have children again before Ramona was born. So in turn, Ramona was very special to every member of her family. On Friday, June 10, 1994, Ramona spent the night with her boyfriend in Morristown, about 30 kilometers away. She returned to Smithers around noon the next day on Saturday, June 11th. She was walking on Main Street when she made it into town and ran into her uncle. It was graduation weekend, and he said he was going to be a designated driver. The uncle asked what her plans were and that he could give her a ride later if she needed one. Main Street was a common place to find and catch rides with someone you knew. A lot of people caught rides from there. Ramona chatted with him a bit and told him she planned on going to a party at Lake Kathleen, near Smithers Airport. Ramona went home and slept until about 6 p.m. She got up and got ready and then had dinner with her mom. At about 9:30 p.m., Ramona was on the telephone before she left home. Matilda just assumed she was talking to her best friend Crystal, but is not 100% sure. When Ramona left her house, she was spotted walking past a couple houses on Alfred Street. Crystal later said that Ramona was supposed to meet her that night in Hazleton at a dance. Hazleton is 70 kilometers away. It is assumed that Ramona went to Lake Kathleen for the party and then was going to go to Hazleton to meet Crystal. But Ramona never met up with Crystal at the dance. When she did not show up, Crystal just assumed she was in Morristown with her boyfriend. In 1994, most everyone relied on landline phone service, so plans could change and you had no way of immediately letting someone know if they were not home when you called. Ramona's mom thought she was with Crystal all weekend. On Sunday, Ramona's boyfriend called her house asking for her. Matilda told him she was at Crystal's. The boyfriend and Crystal both realized that Ramona was missing. Not wanting Ramona to get into trouble, Crystal did not tell Matilda she was missing until Monday, when she did not show up for school or work. Crystal then came clean with Matilda and said she was not with Ramona all weekend. Her mom knew that something was really wrong because Ramona was to give her 2 weeks' notice at work that Monday. She had just gotten an internship as a peer counselor. She had dreams of becoming a psychologist, so she was extremely excited for this opportunity. Ramona was reported as missing, and the RCMP suggested that she just had too much fun over grad weekend and would be home after she recovered. The family phoned everyone they knew and searched everywhere they could think of, even going to the apartments at Lake Kathleen, where the party was supposedly held. Police would also receive a telephone tip on January 27, 1995, that said Ramona's body was west of Smithers. The caller remained anonymous and said their friend told them what happened to Ramona. The police could not move on this tip without more info. Finally, on April 10, 1995, some guys who were four-wheeling got stuck in the mud and were looking for tree branches to get them unstuck when they found Ramona's body. She was found off an old horse trail near the airport off Yelich Road. This was in the general area of the apartments the party at Lake Kathleen was held, the same direction where the anonymous caller implicated. Ramona was found nude. Her clothes, some leggings, and a purple sweater were found folded neatly nearby. Her shoes were also never found. Also nearby was a bright yellow rope and 3 white nylon zip ties. Matilda was told her daughter's death was sexually motivated and was never really told nothing beyond that. Private investigator Ray McCalco, who has since died, looked into many of the Highway of Tears cases. He believes that some of the girls were disposed of in beehive burners. But he went on to say that he interviewed a witness to Ramona's murder and believes that multiple people were involved in her death. He also claimed that the RCMP never properly investigated or interviewed this witness. I'm going to link a documentary made on Ramona Wilson, Lana Derrick, and Tamara Chipman. In the video, Matilda takes us to Ramona's dump site and grave site. It is my most favorite documentary video. It was made in 2006. And as of today, no one has ever been arrested or charged in Ramona's murder. Roxanne Thiara. Roxanne was born in Manitoba to Gail Bruere and was placed in foster care with Mildred Thiara as a young child. Her foster family loved her as their own and would eventually obtain legal guardianship for her. They lived in Quesnel, south of Prince George. Roxanne would later connect with her biological family as a teen. She was very loved by her foster and biological families. Roxanne would spend time in juvenile at the age of 12. She seemed to veer off the deep end after that. She began using cocaine around 1993 and was rarely home. She ended up on the streets of Prince George. Roxanne engaged in survival sex for money and drugs. Even with all this going on, Roxanne would call or go home to her foster family regularly. She told her adopted mom that she wanted help and agreed to go into treatment in June 1994. Roxanne would leave her family home in Quesnel on June 27, 1994, to collect her belongings in Prince George. She was to return home the next day. Her family never seen her alive again. In Prince George in early July, a friend said that Roxanne was going to meet a customer. She walked around the corner of a building and vanished. She was eventually reported missing by her family, who scoured the area in BC Interior looking for her. They posted missing persons flyers everywhere they went. Her decomposed body was found on August 17, 1994, along Highway 16, 2 kilometers east of Burns Lake. Some people just purchased some property and was inspecting it when they found her body. Her foster brother, Rene Biernes, said that Roxanne had mentioned meeting someone who lived in Burns Lake. RCMP believes she was murdered elsewhere and dumped at the site. They also said they think she was shot in the head. At her memorial service, 2 men and 2 women wearing short black dresses showed up in a Cadillac. It is believed Roxanne knew them from her time as a sex worker. As of this recording, her murder is still unsolved. She was only 15 years old at the time of her death. Alicia Germain. Alicia had just turned 16 years old on December 3, 1994. She liked to use the alias Leah. She was a soft-hearted girl who left a hectic home life at the age of 12. She became homeless and was living in the streets of Prince George. Alicia became addicted to crack and heroin and would have to turn to survival sex to support herself. She frequented a place called the Native Friendship Center in downtown Prince George. And according to a worker at the center named Mona Adolph, Alicia wanted to turn her life around and finish high school. Alicia had to grow up fast and never had the chance to really be a kid. She was tired of her lifestyle. On the night of Friday, December 9th, 1994, the center was having a Christmas party for the street kids, and about 150 of the kids were in attendance. Turkey dinner was served, and afterwards at about 8 p.m., Alicia told Mona she was going to meet up with her cousin and be right back to receive her Christmas present. She never returned. Later that night at about 11 p.m., 3 teenagers walking near Haldy Elementary School, 15 kilometers away in the rural outskirts of Prince George, stumbled across her body while walking behind the school. She was stabbed to death. Private investigator Ray McCalco also worked on this case. He knew Alicia and Roxanne Thiara knew each other. They were both sex workers in Prince George. He had a theory that they were both killed by the same person, their pimp. In a Vice documentary, he visited the now closed school, talked to people in downtown Prince George, and tried to locate the person of interest for an interview. The RCMP would later say that they have a suspect and do not have enough evidence to pursue charges against this person. There also was unknown female DNA found at the crime scene that still has not been matched to its owner to this day. Lana Derrick. Lana was a 19-year-old college student studying forestry. She attended the Northwest Community College in Houston, B.C. Lana was close to her family and would usually travel home on weekends, which was near Terrace. She did this on Thanksgiving weekend in 1995. On October 6th, she caught a ride from Houston back home. The friend stopped by her family home so she could drop off her luggage. Her parents were busy working over the whole weekend to finish a contract and were not home at the time she stopped by. The friend then drove Lana to Terrace and dropped her off at a friend's house at about 7 p.m. Lana's stepsister, Clarice, was driving around Terrace with Lana's cousin. Lana's dad had given money to the cousin so that she could give it to Lana. The cousin had the money at home, so Lana told Clarice to get it and she would be by her apartment later to get it. Lana was then known to be at Gigi's nightclub at the Terrace Inn and was seen outside the bar at closing time. From there, she went to Clarice's apartment nearby to collect the $30 her dad wanted her to have. Clarice was half asleep when she showed up. She did not notice any car waiting for Lana and said she was alone. It is believed the last time Lana was ever seen alive was at about 3:30 a.m. on October 7th, 1995. A witness said they were sitting in their car at the Petro-Canada station in Thornhill, just a few minutes outside of Terrace. A car pulled up with two men in the front seat. They believe Lana got out of the back seat and went inside to buy some cigarettes. Lana returned and the car drove towards the Northern Motor Inn. The car was described as an old late model 1980s four-door car that was blue or gray. It was loud, beat up, and it had two white balls hanging from the rearview mirror. Monday came around and Lana's parents were finished with their work contract. They noticed her luggage did not move since she dropped it off on Friday. When Lana did not show up for classes on Tuesday, they knew something was terribly wrong. She was reported missing and the RCMP just said she was probably still out drinking or shacked up with a boyfriend. Lana's family searched around the highway for her in vain. Her Aunt Sally even put up a $10,000 reward. Still nothing ever came up. The witness from the gas station was put under hypnosis and a sketch of two men was drawn up. A man similar to the native man was questioned, and it could not be determined if it was the same man from the sketch. Because of this, the two composite sketches were released to the public. They then were later retracted because it was deemed they were not relevant. No reason was given as to why. Security footage from the store was also written over by the time it was requested. Two strange notes about this case. Lana had a boyfriend who she was seeing off and on. He committed suicide the night she disappeared. A couple driving home along Highway 16 spotted a red van pulling out of an old logging road the morning Lana vanished. They reported this to RCMP and they currently have no official record of it. The male witness has since died and the location the van was spotted is unknown. Lana was last seen wearing black jeans, a green sweatshirt, running shoes, and she wore glasses. She has never been found. Her body lost in the bush somewhere. Nicole Hoare. Nicole was a 24-year-old tree planter from Red Deer, Alberta. In the spring and summer of 2002, she was planting trees near Prince George. There just happened to be a music festival in Smithers on the same weekend Nicole had a break from work. Her sister planned on going to the festival and Nicole told her if she had a break, she would meet her there. It wasn't a definite plan, just more of I will make it if I can type of plan. Well, Nicole was able to make it, but did not tell her sister because she wanted to surprise her. So her sister was not actually expecting her to show up. On Friday, June 21st, 2002 at about 3 p.m., some of Nicole's co-workers dropped her off near a gas station on Gauthier Road, just outside of Prince George. It was a popular spot to hitchhike. Her friends were worried, but she told them she would not get in when the car had more than one man or if she felt uncomfortable in any way. They let her out of the car and she was expected back to work 6 days later on June 27th. She never showed up at the festival or work on the 27th. Her employer contacted her family and wondered if there was an emergency, but nobody knew where she was at and police were notified immediately. Family, friends, co-workers, and the RCMP came out in full force searching for Nicole. The response to her disappearance was criticized because the Native girls along the highway did not get the same treatment. Nicole's family was grateful for the support, but also wished that the other girls would have also gotten the same response. At the time, RCMP tried to distance Nicole from the Indigenous girls by saying she did not fit the same profile. But in fact, she did. Later confirmed by the E-Pana guidelines and her addition to the official list. The great thing about this search effort is that although Nicole was never found, the searchers were looking for any human remains, so they could have possibly found other victims. Unfortunately, they did not. A man by the name of Leland Switzer was a strong person of interest in Nicole's disappearance. 2 days after Nicole disappeared, he shot and killed his brother. His property he owned in 2002 was searched extensively in 2009 for any sign of Nicole. His neighbors called police and said he was setting his wells on fire, and one person found a bag of bones near a garbage heap. Leland even told the RCMP that he stopped and urinated at the spot Nicole was last seen at. He was already in prison for the murder of his brother when RCMP cleared him as a person of interest. Leland was violent and unstable, but investigators do not believe he did anything to Nicole. There was also interest in a car that picked up a hitchhiker near where Nicole was hitchhiking. An orange, square-shaped car crossed 2 lanes of traffic to pick up a female. The hitchhiker appeared to be making travel arrangements with the driver before getting in. Police are not sure if Nicole was a hitchhiker. Nicole is still out there somewhere, presumably also swallowed up by the forest. She was last seen wearing beige capri pants, a gray t-shirt, a red long-sleeve shirt that said Ravens, and was carrying a backpack and shoulder bag. Tamara Chipman. Tamara was 22 years old when she went missing in 2005. She lived in Terrace but often traveled to Prince Rupert. Her mom, Corey, lived there, and she also had friends who lived there. She also had a 2-year-old son who went to live with his father after she disappeared. Tamara also had earned a black belt in jiu-jitsu. Her dad, Tom, and stepmom, Christine, also lived in Terrace, and they were spending time with Tamara's son at the time. They had plans to go fishing on Vancouver Island and dropped off Tamara's son with his dad in Prince Rupert before they left, which was a few days after September 18th. The 18th was the last time they seen Tamara. She did not mention to her dad she planned on going to Prince Rupert. Her mom, Corey, last seen Tamara on September 19th. They spoke on the phone the next day on the 20th. Tamara was a daddy's girl and always called him. He did notice no calls came in from Tamara while he was out fishing. When he returned to the mainland in early November, he and Christine were able to listen to a voicemail from Tamara. It was recorded on September 21st, and Tamara requested that her dad call her back. She was staying at the Moby Dick Inn in Prince Rupert. Tamara was checked out by the time they got the message. Since Tamara traveled so often between Terrace and Prince Rupert, her family did not immediately notice she was missing. Each side just assumed she was with the other side of the family in different towns. At the time, Tamara was going to court for assault charges and had warrants out for her arrest. Her family was hoping she was just hiding out. The family did cursory searches for her before they notified police of her disappearance. Tamara had a car, but it was broke down at the time. One of Tom's friends reported that he had seen Tamara at about 4:30 in the afternoon of September 21st. The same day she left her dad a voicemail from the motel she was staying at. He spotted her attempting to hitchhike out of Prince Rupert towards Terrace on Highway 16 near the industrial park. This was the last time anyone seen Tamara alive. Her family did everything they could to find her. Searches were done in Vancouver's downtown east side. Her dad walked from Prince Rupert to Terrace to search the ditches. No trace of her was ever found. Her aunt Gladys Raddick would turn into one of the biggest advocates for Tamara and all of the other MMIW of Canada. Her son's father was also questioned about her disappearance. Apparently, he was the last person she was with in Prince Rupert. He was very cooperative and voluntarily took a polygraph test, which lasted 5 hours. He hoped for her safe return, but as time went by, he knew she most likely met with foul play. His lawyer advised him against helping search for her because it would look suspicious if he found her body. A witness came forward with a story that the RCMP think may be true. The woman said that Tamara was not liked by some people in Prince Rupert. The witness was with 2 other men in a car when they found out Tamara was hitchhiking and they went to pick her up. One of the guys started arguing with Tamara and he eventually hit her and strangled her to death. They pulled over and dumped her on the side of the road. The man who killed her later returned and dragged her body deeper into the bush. All 3 of these people supposedly involved are now all dead, so the witness's statement cannot be verified. It is believed Tamara was involved in drugs and sex work. This may have played a role in her disappearance. Isla Auger. Isla was 14 and living with her mom Audrey, sister Kyla, and brother Tim in Prince George. Audrey struggled making ends meet, and the kids were even in foster care for a little bit before moving to Prince George. The family eventually settled into a duplex in the city. Audrey's oldest daughter, Sarah, moved near the family to help out with the kids. Audrey was fallen back into her addictions and often gave Sarah her debit cards to pay the bills for her household. She did not trust herself to be financially responsible. Isla and her siblings slept in the basement of the duplex. Isla had been sexually abused by a family member before, and brother Tim felt compelled to sleep on a couch that was pushed in front of the basement door. He was always watching over his sisters. The girls were always together and were the best of friends. They started drinking, smoking weed, and hanging out with a new crowd. They always tried to get Tim to join them, but he always just told them to be safe. On February 2nd, 2006, the kids all decided to go to the Pine Center Mall. It was 4 kilometers from their home. The girls ran into some friends there and decided to go out drinking for the rest of the night. They invited Tim as usual, but he just wanted to go home. The girls somehow got split up and Kyla arrived at home just before dawn the next day. Isla was not at home and would never make it home. Her sister thought maybe she stayed the night with friends. Audrey tried to report her missing right away, but was told to come back in 78 hours to file a report. The family began searching on their own and plastered the city with flyers. About a week later, a passing motorist discovered her body on the side of Highway 16 near Tabor Mountain. She was nude, her clothing and bag were missing. The only thing on her body was a necklace, which was positively identified by Audrey. They also showed her family a photo of half of her face. When her mom asked why not her whole face, the cop told her animals had eaten the other half. Isla was publicly identified in the media on February 15th. During the investigation, Isla was spotted on surveillance tape walking past the Save On Foods gas station. She was headed in the direction of her house. There were unconfirmed reports that she had gotten into a black van near the store. How Isla ended up on the side of the highway is still a mystery. Thank you so much for watching today's video. I'm interested to hear your comments down below on what you think about this. And if you live in the area, please let us know what it's like living there. Is there like a state of constant fear? And if you knew any of these victims, please leave any memories of them down below. And I hope to see you in the next video.